I woke up to the smell of spray paint. Not the usual trash pickup truck fumes, not the neighbor's overcooked bacon. No, this was sharp, chemical, and wrong. I threw on a hoodie and rushed outside, barefoot on my driveway, heart already pounding. And there it was. Graffiti. Across the front of my house. Neon pink and puke green letters sprayed all over my garage door, brick siding, and even my windows. Big block letters, sloppy and angry. Rule breaker, trash, HOA scum, and for some reason, mow your damn lawn. I didn't even have a lawn. I had xeriscaping gravel, drought-resistant plants, and a small cactus that looked like it was flipping someone off. That cactus was also now spray-painted. I stood there, jaw clenched, fists tightening by my sides. Then I heard it. The high-heeled clack of doom. Franklin. Came the shrill voice of Judith Ormond, president of the East Briarwood HOA. The queen of community control. Mid-50s, always in beige slacks and bright lipstick like she was about to host a game show. Oh dear. Looks like someone finally got fed up with your non-compliance streak. She was holding a coffee mug that said HOA equals harmony over anarchy. She sipped it like she hadn't just walked up to a crime scene. I turned slowly. Did you do this? Judith blinked, feigning shock. Franklin, really? That's a serious accusation. I'm simply here to document the vandalism for our records. She pulled out her phone and started snapping pictures. Not of the damage, just of me standing in front of it. I stepped forward. You think this is funny? Oh no, not at all. But you've been warned about your garage paint color, haven't you? And those solar panels still not on the approved list. Maybe someone got tired of your attitude. I nearly lost it. You think this is some kind of HOA-approved justice? She just shrugged and walked off, humming. But I caught it. A fleck of neon pink paint on her wrist. I snapped a photo of her right then. 2 hours later, I had security footage pulled from the camera I'd installed above my porch last year, after Judith tried to find me for leaving a rake visible from the street. I never told anyone I'd mounted the camera. It blended in with the trim. At exactly 2:30 a.m., the footage showed a woman in a hoodie and gloves pulling a spray can from a tote bag. The hoodie slipped back just enough for the porch light to catch her face. Judith. I stared at the footage for a long time. Then I called the police. Sir, the officer said, watching the video in my garage, that's textbook vandalism. You've got her on camera, clear as day. She's the HOA president, I replied. She's been on me for months. Fines for unauthorized exterior fixtures, complaints about my truck being commercial looking. I think this was personal. He nodded. Well, she's about to get very familiar with the justice system. The police took pictures, collected the spray cans she'd dumped behind the hydrangeas, and asked if I wanted to press charges. Absolutely, I said. 2 hours later, Judith was in cuffs on her own front lawn. She tried to scream something about protecting the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood as they put her in the back of the cruiser. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it. But no, that was just the start. The next morning, I got an email from the HOA board from acting president Clara Wexley, Judith's best friend and fellow beige suit enthusiast, saying I was being fined $200 for external damage visible from the street. Yeah, fined for being vandalized. I printed out the email, stapled a copy of the police report to it, and taped it to the HOA's locked mailbox with a sticky note that read, "You might want to talk to your lawyer before doubling down." I thought I'd earned a breather. But 3 nights later, my motion sensor lights went off again. I rushed outside with my phone recording. No graffiti this time, just Clara and 2 other HOA members standing at the edge of my lawn, measuring my cactus. I stepped onto the porch. I'd ask what you're doing, but I'm guessing you're about to tell me it's 3 inches too tall. Clara nearly dropped her clipboard. Franklin, you startled us. Yeah, that tends to happen when people get caught trespassing. She cleared her throat. We're conducting a post-incident property compliance audit. Given the recent damage, we have to ensure everything is still within HOA regulations. By measuring a cactus at midnight, we didn't want to disturb your day. I stared at them, then pointed to the camera above the porch. Smile. Clara's eyes darted upward. She turned on her heel and left without another word. The next morning, the HOA website's member portal was down. Then it came back online with a brand new emergency vote scheduled for the next Saturday. Agenda: Special Assessment Increase for Communal Legal Defense Fund. They were trying to make the entire neighborhood pay for Judith's legal fees. I wasn't having that. I printed flyers. I knocked on doors. I handed out USB drives with the security footage of Judith tagging my house. I showed people the fine they tried to hit me with and the vote they were trying to force through. By Wednesday, half the neighborhood was on my side. By Friday, 3 more homeowners came forward with their own stories. Clara had fined one of them for a non-regulation fence built 10 years before the HOA even existed. Another had been cited for excessive Halloween decorations in April. We started calling ourselves the Briarwood Resistance. And Saturday? That's when everything changed. The community center parking lot was packed by 10:30 on Saturday morning. People who hadn't shown up to an HOA meeting in 5 years were suddenly eager to grab folding chairs and whisper with their neighbors. The usual stale coffee and sugarless cookies were nowhere in sight. Instead, someone had brought donuts, and a local food truck was parked across the street selling breakfast burritos. It felt less like a meeting and more like a reckoning. I stood near the back, by the fire exit, watching the room fill. I wasn't on the agenda, but I didn't need to be. The minute Clara stood behind the podium, the murmurs started. "We'll begin this emergency session by addressing item 1 on the agenda," Clara said, tapping the microphone and pretending not to notice the glares. "The board proposes a special assessment of $125 per household to be allocated toward legal consultation and protection for current and former board members facing frivolous accusations." A man in the second row stood up. His name was Darnell, a retired electrician who lived in the neighborhood since it was built. "Are you seriously trying to make us pay to defend Judith after she vandalized someone's house?" Clara cleared her throat. "No names, please. The investigation is still ongoing. She was arrested in front of her begonias," said an older woman with a walker. "We all saw it." Clara tried to smile, but it landed somewhere between panic and indigestion. "Let's maintain order. This is a procedural matter." I walked down the side aisle. If it's procedural, then the procedure's broken. You're asking residents to fund legal costs for a crime one of your board members committed while acting in a personal capacity. That's not just unethical, it's illegal. Several people clapped. One man let out a whistle. Clara leaned into the mic again. "Mr. Wexler, you are not recognized to speak." I held up a folder. "Does this change that?" She froze. I opened the folder, pulled out the notarized petition with signatures from over 60% of the neighborhood, and handed it to the secretary sitting beside her. "This is a community-led motion to initiate a vote of no confidence in the current HOA board," I said. "According to our bylaws, Section 4, Subsection B, any special assessment over $100 requires a 2/3 majority, and any board member under criminal investigation must recuse themselves from voting or representation until the matter is resolved." For the first time, Clara looked unsure. The secretary read the petition silently, then set it down and looked at her. "It's valid." Gasps, then murmurs, then full-on conversations erupted throughout the room. Clara tried to speak again, but the crowd had turned. A man near the front called for a vote on the motion. Hands shot up. The secretary did a quick count. It wasn't even close. The board was dissolved on the spot. By noon, a transition committee was forming. By 2, Clara had left the building without saying another word. She left behind a clipboard, 2 pens, and a folder labeled "Fines Pending." I flipped it open. My name was in there, along with dozens of others. Most of the fines were completely bogus. One woman had been fined $200 for having an excessively whimsical garden gnome. I took photos of every page. But exposing the board was only half the fight. Judith still had to face consequences beyond humiliation and handcuffs. Her court hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I was listed as the primary witness. The prosecutor, a woman named Marlene with a habit of tapping her pen against her cheek when she thought, called me into her office on Monday. "She's pleading not guilty," Marlene said. "Claims she was framed, that someone edited the footage to make her look guilty." I laughed. "So her defense is that I defaked a criminal act onto her own face?" She's also saying the HOA had given her authority to correct non-compliance as she saw fit. I blinked. By spray painting insults on my siding? Marlene held up her hands. "I didn't say it was a good defense." Her lawyers grasping. "What do you need from me?" "Bring the original footage, the timestamped files, and anything else that shows motive. Emails, letters, anything that demonstrates a pattern." I brought a flash drive and a binder thicker than a phone book. When Thursday came around, the courtroom was packed. Half the neighborhood had shown up. Some wore t-shirts that said "Justice for Franklin" with a cartoon cactus on the front. One woman had brought popcorn. Judith sat at the defense table in a gray suit that looked like it was borrowed from a funeral home. Her expression was rigid, jaw clenched so tight it looked like she was trying to hold in a sneeze with pure hate. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, kept flipping through a stack of papers that clearly weren't helping. Marlene called me up. I described the night I found the graffiti, the smell, the colors, the things she wrote. I explained how I discovered the security footage, how I identified her, and how she conveniently forgot about the camera mounted above my porch. Then Marlene played the video. There was Judith, hood up, can in hand, shaking it with a fury that made her look like she was trying to kill a wasp. The courtroom was dead silent except for the hiss of spray paint and the soft crunch of her orthopedic sneakers on gravel. Then Marlene showed the photo I'd taken the next morning, the tiny bit of neon pink on Judith's wrist. The defense tried to object, but the judge shut them down fast. After I stepped down, Marlene introduced the police report, the chemical match of the spray paint to the cans found in Judith's tote, and the fact that the tote had her initials stitched inside in gold thread. Then she called the arresting officer, who confirmed everything and added that Judith had called him a municipal parasite during the ride to the station. The jury didn't even need to leave the room. Guilty on all counts: vandalism, property damage, and trespassing. The judge ordered Judith to pay for professional cleaning and repainting, serve 100 hours of community service, and attend a court-mandated anger management course. She was also barred from holding any position of authority in any HOA for 5 years. The room erupted in applause. Outside the courthouse, people clapped me on the back like I just won a championship game. Someone handed me a laminated HOA violation notice with "void" stamped across it in red. I stuck it on my fridge when I got home. But the fallout didn't stop there. The interim committee began a full audit of the HOA's financial records. What they found made my blood run cold. Over $30,000 in consulting fees had been paid to a company that didn't exist. That company was registered under a shell corporation linked to Judith's cousin in another state. The committee contacted the district attorney. By the following week, a second investigation was underway, this time for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. Bank subpoenas were filed. The HOA's account was frozen. Clara lawyered up. 2 other board members fled the neighborhood entirely. And suddenly, what started as graffiti turned into a criminal enterprise unraveling at the seams. People began talking openly about how fines were selectively enforced, how certain properties were allowed to skirt regulations if they were friends with the board, how grant money for community improvements had mysteriously vanished. The neighborhood, once ruled by fear and compliance, had found its voice. And we weren't going quiet ever again. The first time I set foot inside the HOA's storage unit, it smelled like wet cardboard and stale printer toner. The interim committee had asked me to help dig through the old files since I'd become the de facto neighborhood bloodhound. Word had gotten around that I had a knack for uncovering things the board would rather keep buried. I didn't object. I brought gloves, a headlamp, and a portable scanner. It felt like we were about to raid a forgotten tomb, and in a way, we were. There were 23 banker boxes lined up on rusted metal shelves, each one labeled in faded Sharpie, some with vague titles like Events 2019 or Code ENF. Miscellaneous. We started with the least suspicious-sounding ones and worked our way down. Clara and Judith hadn't exactly been subtle, but the deeper we went, the weirder it got. Inside a box labeled Vendor Invoices Q2 was a manila envelope sealed with electrical tape. It wasn't addressed, just stuffed between some landscaping quotes and an expired pest control contract. I peeled it open and pulled out a series of receipts and bank statements that didn't match anything in the HOA's ledger. One showed a wire transfer of over $12,000 to something called Greenpoint Advisory, which, according to the letterhead, specialized in community compliance consulting. Another had a signature that looked almost exactly like Clara's, but not quite. The tail on the R looped the wrong way. I scanned everything and flagged it for the audit team. Then I found the photo. It was tucked behind a receipt for a bulk order of no soliciting signs, black and white, printed on glossy paper. It showed Judith and Clara standing beside a man I didn't recognize, shaking hands outside a building with barred windows. The sign above the door read, Davenport Holdings. I ran a search that night. Davenport Holdings was not a consulting firm. It was a property acquisition company that specialized in distressed assets, foreclosures, tax liens, and home seized due to HOA enforcement. And they had a history of buying up properties cheap, kicking out the owners, and flipping them for profit. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about power trips and fines. This was about money. Big, quiet, under-the-table money. I called Marlene the next morning. They were strategically pushing people into foreclosure, I said. That's why some fines were ridiculous or stacked up overnight. They were creating violations, then using those violations to justify legal action and liens. Do you have anything solid? She asked. Receipts, wire transfers, photos. I just sent them over. There was a pause, then the sound of her typing. I'm forwarding this to our financial crimes unit. If what you're saying is true, this goes way beyond vandalism. This is real estate fraud, possibly racketeering. By the end of the week, subpoenas were flying faster than HOA newsletters ever had. The state attorney general's office got involved. Investigators showed up at Clara's house with a search warrant. They walked out with 2 laptops, a desktop tower, and a safe deposit key. The next day, the news vans rolled in. Local reporters swarmed the community entrance, asking anyone who walked by if they'd ever been fined for unauthorized mulch or non-conforming curtain color. Turns out, they had. We weren't just a neighborhood anymore. We were a story. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from a former board treasurer named Leon. He'd resigned quietly the year before, citing family obligations. Turns out, he'd stepped down after realizing funds were being siphoned off, but hadn't known how to prove it. When he heard about the investigation, he contacted the AG's office and handed over a USB drive he'd hidden in his garage toolbox. It contained a spreadsheet of HOA expenditures, real ones, pulled from the original software before Clara had the system updated. The data showed a pattern: small but consistent overbilling of services, duplicate invoices, and recurring payments to shell vendors. The kicker? Judith and Clara had approved every payment. At the following town hall, the atmosphere was different. There was no coffee, no sign-in sheet, just a packed room of neighbors sitting on folding chairs, many of them holding manila folders, USB drives, or simply their own HOA violation notices. Everyone had something to say. I got fined for a sidewalk crack that wasn't even on my property, said a man near the front. They threatened to put a lien on my house over $87. They told me my shutters were non-compliant, said an older woman. Then 2 weeks later, I got a letter from a company offering to buy my house outright. Davenport Holdings. Marlene herself showed up halfway through. She stood in the back in a navy pantsuit, listening quietly, taking notes. When the testimonies ended, she stepped forward. I can't comment on an active investigation, she said. But I can say this. If you have documents, emails, or any communication that shows a pattern of coercion, threats, or undue influence by the HOA, bring it forward. Your voices are essential to holding people accountable. After she left, people didn't scatter. They stayed. They talked. They formed groups with clipboards and sign-up sheets. Someone suggested creating a new charter. Someone else proposed term limits. A third person, a young couple who'd only moved in 6 months ago, offered to redesign the HOA's website and make all future board meetings accessible online. We were rebuilding from the ground up. But not everyone was thrilled. One night, just after midnight, I heard a sharp thud outside. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped onto the porch, and found a brick on my driveway. Attached to it was a note, scrawled in red marker on a torn piece of HOA letterhead. Drop it, or we drop you. The handwriting was messy, the kind you get when you're angry or in a hurry. I took a photo, then bagged it with gloves. I called the police, and they took it seriously, especially given the ongoing investigation. They dusted it for prints, took DNA swabs, and added it to the growing case file. I didn't tell anyone about the brick. Not yet. I didn't want to give whoever threw it the satisfaction of knowing it rattled me. But it did. Not because I was scared, but because it proved something I already suspected: someone still had a lot to lose. The AG's office issued arrest warrants for Clara and another former board member the following week. The charge list was long: wire fraud, conspiracy, financial elder abuse, and unlawful property acquisition. They were taken into custody at dawn. The news called it the HOA hustle. Judith's trial was scheduled to begin the following month, and they were trying to bundle the charges to avoid dragging it out. Her lawyer filed a motion to suppress the photo and transaction evidence, claiming it was collected without proper authorization. The judge denied it twice. Meanwhile, the interim committee finally gained access to the HOA's secondary bank account, the one Clara had insisted was just for emergency expenses. It held less than $200. The original balance had been over $30,000. The rest had vanished over the past 18 months. But what really stunned everyone was the list we found inside the last box. It was handwritten in Judith's blocky script. Titled, Target List Q3, it had 22 names. Beside each one, a note, repeat violator, or uncooperative, or refused landscaping. My name was third. At the bottom, someone had scribbled, Start Process Davenport. We turned that list over to the AG's office. It became Exhibit 1 in the next filing. I walked into the kitchen that evening, poured myself a glass of water, and looked out at the cactus still standing tall in my front yard. It had been cleaned professionally, but a faint outline of green spray paint still clung to the side. I never bothered to paint over it. I liked having a scar, something visible. The neighborhood had changed. More lights on at night. More people walking dogs, waving. Fewer whispered complaints. More questions at meetings. Someone even brought a mariachi band to the last block party. I couldn't remember the last time anyone mentioned curtain colors. Clara and Judith would likely face prison time. The state had enough to press felony charges. But their downfall wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something better. Something we built ourselves. The morning after the target list was turned over, I woke up to find a manila envelope on my doorstep. No return address. No stamp. Just my name written in all caps with a fading blue marker. I brought it inside carefully, peeled it open, and slid out a single sheet of paper. It was a court summons. Except it wasn't for me. It was for a deposition Clarice. Marlene had filed a motion late the night before to question her under oath for a newly opened investigation. This one wasn't just about HOA abuse or financial misconduct. It was about coercion, unlawful foreclosure tactics, and what the court described as systemic targeting of vulnerable property owners for personal financial gain. I drove down to the courthouse that afternoon, where Marlene met me in the hallway with a look that could cut glass. She cracked, she said, motioning toward the closed conference room where Clara sat surrounded by 2 defense attorneys and a court reporter. Tried to hold the line at first, but we showed her the receipts, the emails, the list, especially the list, and she folded like wet laundry. I leaned against the wall. So she's talking? Marlene nodded. More than that. She's naming names. Clara had agreed to a limited immunity deal in exchange for full disclosure of every scheme, every accomplice, and every transaction tied to the fraudulent property takeovers. According to her, the operation went back nearly 3 years. Judith had been the architect charming people into siding with her during meetings, quietly rewriting fine schedules, and slipping in new resolutions during sparsely attended board sessions. She called it neighborhood optimization, Marlene muttered as we walked. Said it was necessary to preserve property values and eliminate instability. I glanced at her. Instability meaning people who didn't look or act like Judith wanted. Marlene didn't respond. She didn't need to. By the time Clara's deposition ended, the case had expanded beyond our neighborhood. 2 other HOAs in nearby suburbs were flagged for irregularities with eerily similar patterns: sudden fines, escalating penalties, and unsolicited offers from shell companies. The AG's office launched a collaborative task force with the state housing department. And then the rail bomb dropped. During Clara's sworn statement, she revealed that several of the fraudulent foreclosures had been pushed through by a notary public who wasn't legally certified. His stamp had expired 2 years before, but he continued signing off on lien documents and property transfer forms. His name was Leonard Bryce, a man Judith had described at a board meeting once as a trusted facilitator. The task force obtained a warrant to search Leonard's home. What they found filled 3 vans, stacks of falsified property records, fake compliance notices, and a locked filing cabinet containing over 100 signed letters of intent from homeowners, most of them elderly, who'd been misled into believing their homes were being seized legally. The press ran with it. The local news anchor opened that night's broadcast standing in front of our neighborhood sign with a headline that read, HOA fraud scandal expands, elderly targeted in property scheme. They aired footage of Judith being escorted into a state courthouse, head down, flanked by marshals. It wasn't just the community watching anymore, it was the entire city. 2 days later, I got a call from a woman named Linda who lived 3 streets over in a cul-de-sac I never visited. Her father, a Korean War veteran, had passed away the year before. She said the HOA began fining her mother less than a month after the funeral. At first, it was for things like improper mailbox placement and non-standard brick hue. Then came the threats of liens and legal action. They told her she'd lose the house if she didn't pay, Linda said. No one would listen. We didn't know it was happening to anyone else. I gave her Marlene's office number. By the end of the week, more than 24 families had come forward with similar stories. Most of them had been too scared or ashamed to speak out, thinking they'd somehow failed to follow the rules. The task force set up a hotline and began collecting sworn affidavits. I started attending the public hearings. They were held in a municipal building downtown, where folding chairs lined the walls and the air always smelled like burnt coffee and copier paper. Marlene led the sessions, flanked by investigators and a rotating cast of legal aides. One by one, residents approached the microphone and told their stories. An elderly man with a cane described how he'd received 3 violation notices in a single week, one of which claimed his chimney was aesthetic pollution. A single mother recounted how a board member threatened to report her to child services if she didn't remove her daughter's swing set. A couple said they were fined for illegal use of decorative lighting because they used solar-powered lanterns during a blackout. Every testimony was documented, time-stamped, and added to the growing case file. Marlene said they were building a civil class action suit alongside the criminal charges. Back in the neighborhood, the transformation was tangible. The interim board, now chaired by a former school principal named Diana, had begun revising the bylaws. They added transparency requirements, capped fine amounts, and eliminated the clause that allowed board members to serve indefinitely. They also established a public ledger where every transaction was recorded and posted monthly. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. One evening, about a month after the investigation went public, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox. No envelope this time. Just a small white card with a message. Thank you for not backing down. You gave us all a reason to speak. There was no signature, just a small pressed flower pinned to the corner. I kept it on my fridge. Meanwhile, the legal process continued to churn. Judith's trial date had been set for early fall. The charges now included conspiracy to commit fraud, elder exploitation, falsifying public records, and obstruction of justice. Her legal team filed a motion to sever the charges, claiming the case was overly broad and emotionally biased. The judge denied it without hesitation. The day of the trial, I sat behind Marlene in the gallery. Judith wore a navy blazer and a tight expression. She didn't look at the crowd. Her attorney spent the first hour trying to paint her as a misguided but well-intentioned community leader. Then Marlene stood up. She brought out the documents, the wire transfers, the notarized testimonies, and most damning of all, the footage of a recorded phone call between Judith and Leonard. In it, she instructed him to keep the paperwork light and make sure the old ones don't ask too many questions. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole before serving 8. Clara, who had cooperated fully, received a reduced sentence, 18 months of house arrest, plus 5 years probation and a permanent ban from serving on any board or nonprofit. The rest of the co-conspirators were dealt with accordingly. Leonard Bryce was sentenced to 10 years. The fraudulent shell companies were dissolved, and the properties they had acquired were returned to their rightful owners through a restitution program set up by the task force. A week after the verdict, the neighborhood held a potluck in the park, the same one the old board had once tried to shut down for excessive noise during daylight hours. People brought folding tables and homemade casseroles. Someone brought a portable speaker and played jazz. Kids ran through the grass barefoot. Diana raised a toast with a plastic cup of lemonade. "This is what community looks like," she said. "Not control, not fear, just neighbors looking out for each other." I stood in the back, watching the crowd laugh and mingle. The air smelled like grilled corn and cinnamon. Someone had even brought a cake shaped like a cactus, with the words "Still Standing" written in green frosting. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. The silence of justice served was loud enough.